thank you so much. Welcome everyone to this knowledge platform session on justice for all as a vital strategy and tool for repairing the social contract. I'd like to thank the knowledge platform for its continued work to bring us together for these essential conversations, and of course to Pathfinders for organising the session and for the work that it's done over the years to bring the justice actors together around the people-centred justice theme. And also a quick shout out to the justice leaders, the young justice leaders. We'll hear more about them in a while, and to Hill, who provides the secretariat for the justice leaders. I'm David Stephen. I'm a senior fellow at the UN Foundation, where I led the team of partners that the Secretary General asked to support his work on our common agenda, the plan he put forward to the General Assembly on the future of multilateralism. At UN Foundation, I also support our Next Generation Fellows and our work with the Unlock the Future coalition, which brings together the world's leading youth-focused and youth-led organisations and networks. And we're incredibly excited to be helping bring together this intergenerational dialogue at a time when the Secretary General has asked for space to be created for young people to act as designers of a better future. In our common agenda, the SG warned that the social contract was under stress in societies around the world, and I think most of us would agree, just looking out of our windows, reading the newspapers, watching our screens, that stress has simply increased since the SG made that warning 14 or 15 months ago. We are in a world that's being hit by multiple overlapping, interlocking crises and emergencies, and the signs seem to be that could well worsen over the next 12 months or so with the global economy. All of the indicator lights flashing red, and many signs of stress out there. In his report, the SG called for reimagining the social contract, and he identified justice as one of the main ways that the social contract could be reimagined, re-engineered, strengthened in countries. He described it as a critical path for renewing the social contract, and he talked about transforming justice systems in a way that strengthened the bonds that hold our society together. I think we know from the work of the Task Force on Justice and others who have explored this problem that there are three primary routes which people-centred justice touches on the social contract. First, in the biggest picture, justice simply affects our sense of whether we live in a society that's characterised by fairness or unfairness, whether a strand of justice runs through the social contract or not is important to the way that people feel about the society that they live in. Second, the justice system should provide a way for groups within a society to address their grievances, and to do that before those grievances begin to fuel unrest, insecurity, violence, and the worst case, violent conflict. And a third, a justice system should help people resolve the disputes and everyday justice problems that they have, and almost invisibly act as a lubricant for the social contract, make society function better in many myriad, often invisible ways. So three ways that justice can make a positive contribution, but I think we also have to be honest to the fact and open to the fact that justice is also or injustice is one of the biggest drivers of social breakdown in our societies around the world, and often the justice system is directly implicated in that social breakdown. The failures, corruption, abuses of justice institutions have driven some of the most consequential episodes of insecurity in recent history, and have had the sorry track record of causing major damage to societies that has often rippled across borders. When we look at the work of the Task Force on Justice, I think the core messages that it put forward still remain relevant to our discussions of how practically to go about strengthening the social contract. help more people resolve their justice problems, help more people solve their disputes first. Second, prevent injustices from occurring and confront the abuses and corruption in justice institutions, so a preventive role as well as a response role. And then thirdly, the enabling role of using justice system as a platform to allow people to participate more fully in their societies and economy. So response, prevention, and an enabling role, all of which can strengthen the social contract, and all of which need to be done at scale, given the billions of people who currently are poorly served or not served at all by the justice that is available in their societies. Over recent years, the community working on people-centered justice has made genuine strides in taking this work forward. And we have big opportunities coming up in the next couple of years. The SDG Summit will be held, the second SDG Summit will be held in September 2023, September next year. And then a year later, we have the first summit of the future. Each of these offer opportunities for leadership, and we're beginning to see a new focus for leadership in the Justice Action Coalition and in its 2023 Justice Appeal. And I think it's positive that we're seeing governments, member states, key international organizations, major civil society networks, and other stakeholders stepping up already ahead of the SDG Summit. But we also need independent justice leaders to provide direction at this critical time. And this session brings together a leadership group of people who've really served at the highest levels of justice systems and who now work with their peers to shape and steer people-centered justice transformation, so the justice leaders. And it also brings into the room the young justice leaders, a newer group formed in the wake of the work on our common agenda, where Pathfinders and other partners have pulled together a group of some of the most exciting and innovative young champions for justice from around the world and provided them with a platform for leadership. The purpose of this session is threefold. First, to explore the links between justice and the social contract. Second, to really get practical, to talk about examples of how people-centered justice can significantly and measurably strengthen the social contract. And third, to identify opportunities to mainstream people-centered justice and to push it out of the silo that we sometimes find ourselves in, into being a tool for transforming societies, strengthening the social contract, and doing that at scale. This is an interactive session. I see this screen filling up with a growing number of people who've come along to take part, and we're hoping that you'll do much more than listen, that you'll really participate actively. Please get in the chat, say who you are, where you come from, and start to comment on what you hear, to put forward questions ahead of the session when we open the discussion up. And we're also now opening some polling, which will allow us to get an idea of whether you think the justice systems are being strengthened, what your views on people-centered justice, and just kind of gauge the room. So please get into the poll and have a vote on that. But first, to our amazing panelists, we have three. First, we have Alison Maynard Gibson, a barrister, a politician, a community rights advocate, and someone who served twice as Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs at the Bahamas. She has many, many subsequent accomplishments. You can read those in full in her biography, but she's currently a visiting scholar at the Harvard T.C. Chan School of Public Health and a consultant to Clement T. Maynard and Company. Alison was one of the leading members of the Task Force on Justice, which is where I had the privilege of working with her, and is a compelling advocate for people-centered justice and one of the members of the Justice Leaders, of course. Second, we have Gulsen Gula, a member of the Young Justice Leaders, so one of the first cohorts to join this new group. She's a researcher and data literacy consultant who examines and reimagines the relationship between data, justice, society, and power. She's a social worker, and she with experience in the criminal justice system. So she brings a very practical experience to this work that she's doing on data. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Agnes Cynthia Amoding. Cynthia, a young justice leader and a colleague of mine, is a Next Generation Fellow at the United Nations Foundation, where she contributed to our common agenda and to, if you haven't seen it, the fantastic companion report that young people did, our future agenda. So those are our three panelists, and we're going to go first to Alison. So Alison, if you will, think back to when you took over as Attorney General. I think you said that you inherited a justice system that was slow and unresponsive. You found that people were frightened of crime and believed they'd seldom get justice if they had a civil case. What impact was this having on social cohesion, on the social contract in the Bahamas, and how did you attempt to tackle the problem in a way that would strengthen the social contract?
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. Before I jump into the answer, let me say that I'm no longer, the pandemic took care of that, a visiting scholar at the School of Public Health. So just for the record. So yeah. Thank you for your questions. Everybody wants to feel that whether it's the education, health system, or any of our systems, that there's justice in the system. However, is the way by that. I'll just talk about some of the practical, so it's having an adverse impact on our society, backlogs, inability to get matters resolved, feeling that the cost was too high, therefore unfair, and all of that. So what I did was attack the criminal justice system first, because that's really where people feel lack of peace and instability. And we were able, through the use of technology, to implement a lot of different tools to facilitate access to the system. For example, facilitating witnesses coming easily to give to trial. We also did things like through the use of video conferencing technology. So our courts were all technologically equipped. We also did a very small thing, actually, and that is to make sure that all of the actors in the justice system, the criminal justice system, met on a regular basis, not the defense, but everybody on the state side, so that mistakes that could be avoidable and that were causing delays could actually be avoided. And just one more thing, as I have a brief answer, is that what we tried to do, and what we did successfully also, was implement a calendaring system. So project management, so to speak. So just little tools that we use, that people use in everyday life, we brought to the justice system, so that there was not double booking of valuable court time and that kind of thing. There are other examples, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer questions as well later on.
And just to follow up on that, you know, if there was this concern about the criminal justice system, and if that was driving feelings of insecurity in people's lives, were these reforms something that you felt you had strong political support for, or was this something that you were really having to push to make happen?
Well, there was absolutely strong political support, which is actually, I think, essential for it to be successful. We have to have the state allocate the resources. We increased the number of courts. We had to buy the technology and so forth. We are an archipelagic nation, so that added to it. Without the support, in terms of political support from the state, it isn't going to happen, really. We have to have strong political support.
Brilliant. So let me come back to you in a minute, Alison, but go over to Coulson. I mean, you've heard Alison talking, and you know, we know that Alison is a big believer in using technology to improve both the quantity and quality of people-centered justice, and that she sees innovation as a force for change. Within the Young Justice Leaders, you co-lead a group on increasing access to justice data and promoting data justice. Do you think the digital revolution is helping us deliver more people-centered justice? And if it is, how? And if it's not, what needs to change?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, David. Well, I think the short answer is yes and no. Sadly, there is no, I cannot give a clear, snappy answer, but it is true. It is, technology is, of course, one of the main key drivers of change in society. In today's society, we see through technological innovations, the very fabric of our society is changing, the power balances are shifting. And of course, this is having some impact on the justice systems, but also on general in our social contract. And sadly, the one we currently have, the social contract, is not working for the many. And the role of technology in reimagining this social contract, I think, is undeniable. But the reality is yes, technology has a power to give so many people a voice, represent themselves in a way that they couldn't before, helping us going through the systems, like Alison's example, really helping this very kind of backlogs kind of opening. We also saw the benefits of technology during the global pandemic and how it really helped manage data in a way that no human being would be able to do it single-handedly. So there's definitely lots of benefits there. But what I am advocating for is essentially the critical questioning of technology's role in when we are thinking it in relationship with justice and with the social contract. Because as we know, misrepresentation on online systems is a big issue. The already existing biases and social injustices in society is being replicated on online tools, data categories. If you can think about, all the ways we rearrange these systems. So that is like an infrastructural challenge, but also on the other hand, we are also seeing people who are getting the power on social media movements, like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, that really gives society a voice, but also it can also be used for a tool to oppress certain people, or misinformation is a big challenge currently, which if we don't have that common ground, then how can we really build towards building a more fair and more trustworthy social contract? So I'm happy to dive into this rabbit hole more, but to again answer your question, it's a gray area and there are benefits and harms that we have to think critically.
So let's indeed dive a little bit deeper into that rabbit hole. And are there specific examples of countries or a particular sector where you think they are really beginning to use data in an innovative way, in an equitable way, and in a way that is delivering results that we should learn from?
Yeah, I think definitely the example of Alison in justice field, there are many countries who are essentially digitalizing already existing systems and making it accessible to many more people. Also, one of the other areas, I believe, the health sector, which are incredible innovation is happening through the computing power that we didn't have before. So there's definitely lots of benefits for millions of people. The potential is there to be unlocked. And also, I think on a societal level, there is also the social movements. If you're thinking about social contract, the debate that it allows people to have connection, like meetings like this one, if you imagine, this wouldn't happen 50 years ago as easily. So it's also contributing to that public sphere where we share ideas, where we communicate better, where we can really expose to different parts of the world and challenge our own thinking. So those are some examples that I can give.
And Alison, I could see you nodding your head when Gulsen started to talk about these positive examples. Do you see the change accelerating in the time since you were in office? And are there particular examples you'd point to that we should be looking at?
Absolutely. I mean, I would just simply look at the fact that technology was already in the courts when the pandemic hit. Because it was there, the courts were able to continue hearings, right? And so rather than shutting the system down completely, hearings were able to continue. There were feelings about hearings on the criminal side, because how would we actually get juries? But that's healthy. Juries to be, do you want to have juries virtually? Those kinds of questions. But that debate, I think, is also a healthy debate, because, as was just said, we should be able to participate. That makes us own the system and feel that it is a just system. And then I just want to make one comment. To the extent that the technology that we're using and speaking about right now is not available widely, and therefore we are actually still excluding some people, I think that we should continue to push to have different ways of resolving conflicts or disputes, like telephone. Why can't we have a telephone conference? And there are many other examples, but that kind of innovation and openness to change, and feeling that everybody should be able to have their dispute resolved or prevented, headed off at the pass, so to speak.
I mean, it slightly reminds me of a point that Micah de Langen often used to make when she was running the justice work at Pathfinders, is that, you know, with technology, you can begin to see what's happening across 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 housing disputes. And then you can start to see patterns. And once you can see patterns, then you can start to change policy in a way which can cut the disputes from occurring. So I think a lot of potential there. And I think this brings us on to the diversity of provision that you need if you really are to provide people's sense of justice at the scale that's needed. I'm going to turn to you now, Cynthia. I mean, we know that most justice is delivered outside the formal justice system, and that this is especially true for the more people-centered approaches. Often justice providers who are in communities very close to the living with the people that they're trying to serve, really understanding the problems in the context, are best placed to deliver justice, and to do that in a distributed and cost-effective way. A lot of your work has been with informal justice systems, and I wonder what role you think these non-formal actors have in strengthening the social contract, and more importantly, what do we need to do to support them and enhance their ability to play this role?
Well, thank you. To start with the discussion, I think the first thing that we have to resolve is the issue that we always talk about, justice, and how different people define justice. It is not a one definition that is given to what justice is. So you end up realizing that many people have different views that they give about justice. So we have to first define what justice is according to those different people. And I will say that we have the formal justice system and the informal justice system as well. However, there is little that has been done about the informal justice system, and many people, I may say the biggest number of people, feel that they're left out because their issues cannot be resolved when it comes to the formal justice system. Many of the previous speakers have talked about the backlog, the technology, but not everyone is in position to access this technology and to access the formal courts line and operationalize the informal justice system, so that very many people feel included, those who cannot access the formal justice system. And still, different people define justice differently. There are those that attribute it to the restorative system, whereby if they're able to restore peace, then to them that is justice. There are those that define justice to be retributive, that if someone does anything wrong, they must be punished for that wrong that they have done, just like the biblical aspect of an eye to an eye. And yet for some people, that is not what they call justice. So for all these systems to be merged together, there need to be integration of the justice system. Let the formal justice system coexisting with the informal justice system, which is not the case. So there is really need for a special legislation that operationalizes the different mechanisms of informal justice system. So my work is trying to give audience to the different informal justice systems that are existing in the different countries. I can give an example for Uganda. There are very many informal justice systems that people feel attached to, and they believe that that is the only way they can access justice, by using those kind of mechanisms. And if these mechanisms are really operationalized and there is proper legislation for these mechanisms, then I believe that people will feel that they're included in the system, and it will redefine the social contract, because this is a system that they feel attached to, and they will be very much obliged to respect and to follow the rules of that particular system, because they have an attachment to it, than the formal justice system, where people feel left out and they don't feel that they're in position to get justice from there, because the backlog, it is really formal that very many people are illiterate. They are not in position to understand exactly what takes place in courts. Everything is left to the lawyers. And if you don't have a lawyer, then it is really impossible that you're going to access justice. So I think it is proper that these two systems really coexist, and we have to include civil society, and as well as the different political systems, in order to give a push for these informal justice systems or the mechanisms to be legislated. Let there be a legislation that really operationalizes these informal justice systems in different countries. Like in Uganda, there's the Matoput that was really exclusively discussed in the Dominic Ongwen case at the ICC, because this is a mechanism, or this is a method that has really worked for very many people, and they believe it brings justice to them. So such kind of systems and mechanisms should be operationalized in order for people to feel that they're included, and that's the only way that people-centered justice will make sense to very many people. Yes, thank you.
So,
David.
yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, go, Alison.
I'm burning to say something. I would encourage Cynthia and others who are much younger than I to be careful about this. She mentioned the word legislating, the informal system many times. And I think that's a double-edged sword. So I would like, especially young people, to think carefully about it. We are in an era of decentralization. We see the blockchain that you don't need to trust. She said trust. You don't have to trust on the blockchain. You can move, you can conduct commerce, you can store value and so forth. And I think that this is an opportunity, especially when we're talking about other means of resolving disputes. I'm not saying to use the blockchain. The question is whether or not you have to be accepted by legislators, or can people themselves decide that we will settle our disputes in this way. So it's an opportunity. I think we had a wonderful inflection point for people to decide what they want in their systems.
Yeah, I mean, let me push that back to you, Cynthia, because I'm also interested in how to take this Uganda example that you brought up, and how that informal system is changing. Is it becoming, is it gaining confidence and adherence from people, or is it, losing out to other formats with a younger generation? Is it adapting new new technologies and new approaches, as Alison said, or is the model fairly fixed? Is it gaining political support, or does it continue to struggle politically? What is the direction of travel that we see?
Well, my observation, for example, in respect to Uganda, first of all, there are very many economic imbalances that when you talk about the social contract, it tries to equalize everyone, to put them at the same level, that this is the way that we want us to govern ourselves. But then we have different economic needs, and you find that the different classes that are able to access the technology, there are those who are able to access the formal justice, there are those who are completely left out, and they are not in position to access the technology that they can, like, for example, during the COVID period, that they were able to access the court system because it was basically online, and it really locks out a big number of people, a big population of people. So that cannot be said that there is really people-centered justice when a greatest number of people cannot access the justice system that is within the particular country. So it is there's really a lot to be done, and I think we have a long way to go. But just like the previous speaker said, that people really need to decide for themselves what is working for them. So for a great number of people who believe that the particular system that does not require the technology, that does not require the formality, is working for them and it's giving them quick justice, then I believe that it's high time for that particular group of people to decide that this is what is working for us, and so we have to go ahead and use that particular system that is in our favor, unlike the other that is technologized, and there's really a lot of the formalities that they have to go through in order for them to be in position to access the justice. So that's what I believe, and according to Uganda, there's really a long way to go for everyone to be in position to access the justice that is existing.
So let me turn this over to you, Gulsen. I mean, Alison's talked about, you've talked about social movements in terms of, as I heard it, in terms of, protest, as a force for change. But we're also, I think, in the heart of Alison's point, seeing groups coming together to provide justice themselves, to provide alternative ways of resolving disputes, solving people's problems. We have a big movement of paralegals, community justice workers across the world. We have, in my own, I live in Italy now, but in my own country, the UK, we have the Citizens Advice Service, which I believe has 25,000 volunteers and interacts with millions of people each year to provide justice. Do you see that technology is enabling people to come together in that way? And if so, is that a useful strategy for kind of countering the tendency of data to replicate in existing inequities, or is it, in a way, more of the same?
Excellent question, David. I think that I am thinking for so many things that I'll be concise. So yes, technology definitely has the power and the ability to bring us together. That's, I think, no doubt everyone can think of an example where it really helps us, become a more fair, more just society, highlighting some corruptions. That was the case as well with Cambridge Analytica. We saw what was happening with elections. There's so many examples that I can think of that concretely helped people and shift the perspective on how the governments work, what the justice is, what happens when there's an injustice, and what I can do as a citizen, what actions I can take if I'm being disregarded by officials, if I am being silenced by the police, where can I go? So on situations like this, technology was there essentially to help people, and raise their voices and really come together, and also with information, making it accessible to many people. But I think, as you know, Cynthia also mentioned, it's a really important question. Sometimes we really get carried away, but the most basic question is to ask, who has access to the most basic infrastructure, right? These are telephones, internet, digital electricity, regular, reliable electricity. We know many parts, even in developed countries like the US, during the pandemic, many children didn't have access to internet. They didn't have even reliable electricity to be able to participate, which then created this hindrance on their education. But of course, these inequalities in accessing technology does not just appear out of nowhere. They're highly connected in society. There are economical factors, there are societal, political factors as well. So it's really intertwined with how we are building technology and what's happening on that area and what already exists in society. Yeah.
Great, I've got the mute. Let me take this back to you then, Alison. I mean, we've got a comment in the, or a question, no, a comment in the chat talking about the need for signposting, that people don't know how to use the existing systems, they lack resources, support, or legal services. How do we make sure that these more data-driven and digital approaches tackle these inequities, or are we simply building systems that are very well tailored for people who are pretty capable of accessing justice already? I remember somebody saying to me that we're building societies for people with sharp elbows, people who understand how to nudge their way to the front. Is digital exacerbating that tendency, or is it countering it?
I think it's important for us to recognize that access to the internet or means of communication, it's a right. And it is easy if we bring together the appropriate partners. It can come to scale. It's a wonderful opportunity for the private sector to get involved, not just in providing solutions, but also in providing the infrastructure upon which solutions can be based. I think that long gone is the time when we could say that the access to the internet is a luxury. Today, the pandemic showed us that. We just heard of the comment about the children. We haven't yet measured how many children were adversely impacted by the pandemic when they couldn't have access online to education, right? So it's long gone the time when we could possibly say that access to the internet isn't a right. And let me say that if we take this seriously, we won't be excluding remote communities, because the technology now exists to enable remote communities through satellite transmission and other. I'm not an expert in the field, but it exists to enable remote communities also to have access. So this is the opportunity for the public and the private sector to come together and to empower our communities around the world in this way, to more evenly provide access. It's not going to be perfect. Nothing is perfect. But if we're moving in the right direction, that's a good thing.
Great. And go for it, Coulson.
Can I just add something? I think it's also very important for us to acknowledge the unprecedented power and influence the technology field has at the moment, especially private companies, or the big five as they're called. And I really do encourage us to think, or even take these things with a thinking mind when we are really promoting access to internet and digital tools, digital transformation of government systems, when they're promoting citizens to sign up to certain services. I think we are presented with a false dichotomy, essentially, is to say either you're on it or you're being excluded. And when we are on it, we saw many times the failing of protecting our data rights, our right to privacy online, our right to be fair representation. And when these things don't happen, and when people don't want to be on online systems, then the only other option they have currently, and sadly, is to be offline and be excluded. So when we are thinking about the systems, I really also think about how we can make this whole technology field more fair, more respecting of our rights to privacy, our rights to freedom of thought, and without being manipulated, and at what cost internet comes to us, or at what cost we are connecting digitally. Yes, the technology is great, but also we shouldn't go into kind of techno-deterministic narratives where we are promoting technology so much so that the ethics of it or the impact on society becomes an afterthought.
So I'm about to open up to the to the many experts and justice leaders that we have who've joined this meeting. If you have a question, or if you just would like to make a comment or a point, please put your hand up so I can see who wants to speak. You can do it physically. I urge you to put your video on, or please do it digitally using the Zoom platform. Quickly on the digital issue, we, as part of the Summit of the Future, the Secretary General has said that the UN and technology companies should work towards a digital compact to address precisely these issues. Though I wonder actually whether the Digital Envoy and others have thought about the justice components of that digital compact yet, and I urge this community to start reaching out on that. And we know that eBay has one of the biggest dispute resolution platforms in the world. So justice is being provided by these companies in all sorts of relatively undocumented ways at the moment. So that's, I think, one big opportunity. But in your work, Cynthia, one last question to you before we do go to the panelists. In your work as an next generation fellow and for the Secretary General on our common agenda, you were very much focused on young people. They're 50% or so of the world's population under the age of 30, and on future generations, the roughly 11 billion people that we can expect to be born in the rest of this century, people to be born but not yet alive. How do you think justice is changing through the influence of younger people? What are young entrants to the justice systems doing that is different? How are their needs different as justice seekers? What impact is the new generation having on justice? And Cynthia, your camera is currently off. I'm afraid we were having a little bit of glitching on your video, but we can hear you absolutely perfectly. So if you'd like to come on for that question, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. It's good that you can hear me. Unfortunately, you can't see me. However, young people have really come up with very many innovations in order to address the issue of justice, and it is different from how the other generations have been dealing with the issue of justice, to the extent that right now there are very many innovations that have come up online, to the extent that you can be in position to just type a legal issue that you're having, and then you get a redress to it, which was not the case before. It was basically a service that you would access when you have a lawyer and you pay the legal fees, and you're in position to go to the lawyer so that they can advise you about a particular legal issue that you're facing. But with the involvement of the young people and the different innovations that they are having, there are very many online services that if you're in position to access the technology, then you'll be able to get the legal advice that you want. The systems that are available for reporting cases, many of them are coming up to be online, which was not the case before, that you would have to go to the court to register your case and get a case number. But now you can log into a system and then be able to follow up on your case. What time is it up for hearing? they're scheduling conferences, they're all being done online at the comfort of person who is in position to access that. Really, the technology is now, internet is now a right. And for the young people to be in position to come up with these different innovations, they really have to be empowered literally, and they have to be in position to access the internet with the good infrastructure. And also, I've seen very many young people get involved in the issue of justice, that they are coming up with different organizations that they can move to the grassroots and teach the different people in the different communities what their rights are, because if a person does not know what their right is, then they cannot be in position to enforce that particular right. And all this is being done by the young people, both online and as well physically, reaching out to the different people in the different communities. So just to, in a nutshell, I believe young people are doing much, and we just need to encourage them in the issue of people-centered justice, because the biggest population in many countries like mine is, the biggest population is for young people. So if they're left out in such tables to discuss issues of justice, then the society is going to miss a lot of impact. But the fact that many of them have come up and they're being involved in the systems, then it is just needs to be encouraged, so that young people can always come at the table like this one to have this kind of discussions where their inputs are really valued and it is meaningful participation.
Great, thank you. So we've really got the discussion going, and now we're going to start to bring in people to make comments and ask questions. I'm getting a lot of messages in the chat. So if I miss you or I don't go to you, please get your hand up or prompt me again. But we're going to start with Aching Akina. I hope I pronounced your name right. Then go to Kanan, and then to Sam Muller. So Aching, over to you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. It's such an interesting discussion. Thank you for a wonderful panel. I think I may have frozen.
No, we hear you perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll come back to you as soon as you free up. But let's go to Kanan next.
Yes, thank you so much. Very interesting conversation, and it's very nice to also hear the use of technology that can bring access to justice. It's a super good enabler. Also making sure more inclusive technologies that are prevalent in different parts of the world, not super high tech, but just telephone lines and even community justice services that can kind of help bridge the gap. My question is also the use of technology can be a little bit like a double-edged sword at times. There is a risk involved on privacy, security, even concentration of power in a few hands that are running these technology platforms. So how do we mitigate these risks? I can imagine legislation could be one way, but then again, should it only be the government's responsibility or onus to do this? Could there be other stakeholders involved? I know these are not easy questions. I think the world is grappling with it, but very happy to hear the thoughts of the panel on this. Thank you.
Great. So let's take three. I think we've got Achieng back. If you're able to come off mute now, have another go at your comment or question.
Sorry, I find that quite ironic, since Alison was talking about internet being a right. I think for some of us, it's more of a privilege and a luxury. And yeah, not to count the people who, even with my 3 connections, I still struggle to connect. And there's some people who don't even have 1 connection. And I just wonder how, while the digital revolution is great, and I really liked the references to what the Pathfinders are doing and trying to reach grassroots with legal services. But how do we do that in a context where people don't have access, just a basic connection, credible, connection, or just the infrastructure to have that connection is sorely lacking. And it brings me to my main question, which was really about the line between access and uptake of justice and the delivery of justice, where issues of distance, cost, connectivity, for example, Uganda has 120 magistrates courts for a population of about 40 million. So how do you get people to believe in a justice system that is sorely lacking and sorely difficult? It's compromised in several ways, so people don't believe that it's fair. It's far from where they are. They don't understand the language that is used. And this time I don't just mean English, but also in terms of legal language. And I think the problem becomes even more complex if you talk about post-conflict countries, which is a big problem across the continent, where systems have died, governments have lost the trust of their people. Let's say now, even in a context of transitional justice, how do you inspire people to go through a transitional justice process when they don't even understand, they don't even trust the governments that are supposed to be rolling out this justice systems? They don't trust in the fairness of these governments. They don't trust in the legitimacy of these governments. Thank you.
I mean, this is terribly unfair, but let me turn a little bit of that question back on you. I mean, do you see any positive examples where, against those trends of distance and lack of equitable access to technologies, language, lack of trust, weak institutions, inadequate institutions, do you see any hopeful signs where there is innovation that is doing it differently?
I think Amoding mentioned it, that I think young people are taking matters into their own hand and reaching out in terms of justice. But and there are many other organizations that are trying to provide paralegals within communities that can help with minor issues. There's trainings for informal justice actors to try and make those processes more fair and less based on cultural norms and values, and more on justice principles. There's initiatives, but I think the people, the entity that should be taking that initiative, that has the infrastructure capacity to be able to do so, which is the government, isn't doing as much as it should be in terms of making justice accessible to people. And so that really does make things difficult. But yes, there are a lot of innovations that are happening across the continent. I think when government fails, people always find a way, one way or another. So yeah, definitely there are positive things happening.
Brilliant. That was great to hear that. So I'm going to go to Sam now, and then we're going to come back to the panelists, and then I'm going to go for a second round. I see Kelechi is next in line, but if you want to dive in, please indicate in the chat or put up your hand. But Sam, over to you.
Thank you. The challenge I always see with the digital revolution is that we end up digitalizing systems of which we say now they don't really work. And that would really scare me, because once something has been digitalized, it is also a bit set in stone. So I guess my question is, how can we somehow use technology without without cementing the things that don't work into the system, or putting it more positively, how can we make sure that we digitalize the things that really work to help people with justice, and not the things that don't work?
Well, let me again do this irritating moderator trick of bouncing that question back on the person who's asked it. I mean, where do you see digitalization of something genuinely new, or of something scaling up something that already works? Can you give us some models and some examples where you think that's happening?
Well, maybe I could share two examples. One is that last week, for example, our Minister of Justice, in reaction to a report, publicly said that in a fairly large percentage of the divorce procedures that we have in the Netherlands, things really get out of hand. They don't work. They're apparently too adversarial, or whatever. Something makes them not work. And so my worry would be, if we digitalize those procedures, we would be, including that. So that would be something you'd want to avoid. You'd want to innovate the procedure and have the technology able to follow your new or your better procedure that you have. An example where concretely this challenge comes up is, I know in Uganda you have the court system, and you have the local council courts. And people always first go to the local council courts, but they have different IT systems, and there's no real sharing of information between the two. So that would be an example where, if you can really solve things as much as you can, which is what everybody wants at the local council court level, and then somebody subsequently goes to court, you'd want to know what happened there. You'd want to be able to share information, and you'd want to avoid that you go from a more I guess a less adversarial local council court procedure, and you don't immediately then go to a totally adversarial procedure in the court system. So how do you make those two work together? And the reality is that in this case, one of the procedures is owned by the Ministry of Local Government, and the other one is owned by the judiciary, and getting them to work together. So that's the kind of challenges you'd be looking at.
So let's go back to the panel. I mean, we had a lot of rich thoughts and ideas from those three questioners, but let me break it down into three buckets. First of all, the question of the concentration of power in a digital realm, and how we counter that. And I think some of us will remember the promise of technology was supposed to really democratize and distribute power, and it hasn't always worked out that way. But can we get back to that original promise? I think second, the issue that Sam has raised around the question of how you re-engineer systems so that they can deliver justice in very different ways, and that's, as he points out, often an institutional challenge of getting actors who don't currently work together to collaborate in new ways. And thirdly, this question that came up about the responsibility of, or this issue that came up about the responsibility of governments, and that governments are often not committed to jumping across a chasm. And we talk about the justice gap, but it's just a massive chasm, a massive canyon, and often we don't see the political will that Alison talked about in the Bahamas to confront that. How do we get governments to step up and do more? So I'm going to go to each of the panelists. Don't feel the need to answer all of those three areas. Answer one or two or three as you'd like to. But let's start with you, Gulson, then go to you, Cynthia, and we'll finally come to you, Alison. Yeah,
sure. Well, these are questions that are, I think everyone can agree, many people across many sectors have been debating since the beginning of the 20th century, I would say. So it is very complex, but I think regarding the concentration of power, especially through the digitalization, why we end up in this situation is because especially the technology companies who are controlling the digital world now have been doing whatever they wanted for so long. And one of their mottos was move fast, break things, and apologize later. So without any regulation and without any consequences, they essentially rule the digital world and set up the rules that everyone expected to play with. So how we challenge it, I think definitely the first thing is accountability. Because if we are talking about power, we cannot talk about it without mentioning accountability. When things go wrong, and they will 100%, what happens? Who is responsible? What are the consequences? And what is the remediation for people who are harmed? And I think we see through legislation now, especially the concentration of power in digital world, where governments are really trying to hold these companies accountable for the harms they did. But to some extent, sadly, it's too late because there's so many people who've been harmed already. In the UK, there was a really sad story that a teenager essentially committed suicide due to partially the social media engagement that she was in. And it was officially recognized, and it was the first time this happened in the UK. And we lost this teenage girl in 2017. After 5 years, justice came too late, but it is still good to raise awareness and really challenge these companies and actually concretely prove people that, yes, they have real power and they're impacting our lives, and these are the consequences, and this is how we're going to hold them accountable. If governments are not doing it, then people come together and they organize movements to really demand government to take action. So that's on the concentration of power regarding digitalization. And the other problem that I see many connection points is how we make sure that we don't digitalize things that are not working for people. And the key question to the key element to that I see is listening to people and really trying to find ways to embed their lived experiences into the systems that you are aiming to digitalize. Because these systems, they are already set in place by someone, but with some assumptions that are in place. And if we don't question those assumptions, and if we don't listen to people saying, well, look, this system is not working for me. I see this very often when I was working as a social worker, even the definitions we use, how we define a family, what a family is, what a marriage is, what marriage can happen between what people. So even these definitions, if they go unchallenged and if they are unfair and if they are causing injustice, and when you digitalize these systems, they essentially echo the harm that they do and really create great injustices in society. So really listening to people and having their lived experiences, understand, and I know this is a challenge for governments to do, but there are many examples where really the community organizations representing their constituents and talking with governments, and we sometimes see action taken by the government really trying to do better and digitalize systems that are actually working, that actually center people's needs and their need for fairness.
Great, thanks for that. Over to you, Cynthia. Anything that you have on the concentration of power, re-engineering systems, or making governments stand up and take their responsibilities?
Well, thank you. In my opinion, I would say that the journey to digitalization of almost every system in the different countries, for many countries, for example, the developing countries, it has really been an effort of the private sector, and the government has really had less or none, apart from maybe the legislation and whatever, but there's little that has really been done by the government in relation to digitalization, and it is a sector that has really been opened out to the private sector, and that's where the power comes in from. That even when these companies are not working to their best, that the internet that you're getting, however much you're paying for it, it is not the best quality that you would ever get, and the government has this to say about it. So it has really locked out very many people, that however much you have the complaints about the much power that these companies are having over the internet, then you have less to do about it, because when the government does not have a larger hand in these different companies that are in the journey of digitalization. And I also think that let there be a hybrid. If the different systems, for example, the justice system or education system, there is digitalization of that particular sector, then let it be a hybrid of the online and as well as the physical bit of it. For example, during the COVID period, where the education sector was much more online, there are very many people that were locked out and they were not accessing these online services to be able to attend the students to be able to attend their classes. And I would emphatically say that there were schools which were saying that if you cannot afford the online services, then you should wait for another year for you to be able to attend your classes. But if this is brought back to the justice system, that you have a case, but it entirely has to be conducted online, then the person who cannot access this online service, they are going to be locked out completely. So let it be a hybrid of the online and as well as the offline part of it. Let it be physical, that you can go to the court and register your case, register your company physically, than digitalizing everything, that it has to be entirely done online. And also the issue that the existing justice system is not working because the government is no longer trusting the people. I would say that even the people are no longer trusting the justice system. So there is need for it to be opened up. And it is going to be a high time that people are going to create their own courts in their own villages, that they sit and decide their own cases without inviting any jury that is going to deliver the justice, because to them, they believe that the other justice system, they do not understand it, and it is completely alien to them. So it is going to be brought back into the hands of the people, that they create their own courts and decide their own cases in the languages that they understand and as fast as possible. The only shortcoming that comes with that there are very many gender imbalances and the customs that are involved in the process of the informal justice. But if all that is ironed out, then I believe that people are taking the mandate into their hands, because these are governments that have failed them with the systems that they cannot understand. So it is high time for the people to open up the justice system and take up the mandate.
Thanks for that, Cynthia. And I'm coming to you, Alison. I really want to try and push you on this question of how we get governments to stand up and do more, and how we build political will. The first time I met Sam Muller, he did a presentation. I think you were probably there as well, and he presented on the survey work they'd done with justice leaders around the world. And he said the one word that came up out of all these interviews of what the experience of being a Minister of Justice or an Attorney General was loneliness, that it's a lonely, isolated job where you face political pressures, even from within your own government. And as justice leaders, I think, the role that your group has taken on has really been to try and create a network of serving justice leaders around the world and to help them move together to implement people-centered justice. Can you say a little bit more about that work and how you think that is an effective strategy to build build political support for this movement.
Yeah, thank you. It is a lonely place, yes. And that is why justice leaders are quite firm about being available always to help others in the same position, either to listen so that you can have a conversation with somebody who speaks the same language or understands because they would have experience with your experience and they can possibly give advice, or through active sharing of what works. There are other examples as well, but if you actively share what has worked for you, recognizing that there's no one size fits all, but when you're able to share what works, there's usually a situation, or there is often a situation where someone can say, well, actually that might work. You don't have to implement it the same way necessarily, because there's always context, especially cultural context. But justice leaders is very strong about doing that. I also want to say that justice leaders recognizes that data, we use that word frequently at the beginning of this particular encounter, the governments are going to spend where there's a return. And we have to continue to encourage government to recognize that return is not always physically money or physically monetized, but you can find value in in peace and people buying into a system that works, and that translates across the system. So where it's possible for those who are actors in this space to encourage politicians to look differently at the system and look through it at a more 360-degree perspective. And then I also want to be quite blunt. Politicians are also moved by the vote. If there are enough people who want something and they are mobilizing from ground up, let's not fool ourselves. Those who are there usually want to be reelected. So it's important not to ignore the vote as well, okay? I would like to say a little bit about re-engineering, if I may, David, really quickly. I think I agree with Sam and everybody else who's spoken as well, that we shouldn't have solutions going looking for problems. I agree with that 100%. I think that we also have to recognize that, as I said before, there is no one size fits all. And it's important to promote integration as opposed to working in silos. I think the family court, Sam spoke about that, is a really wonderful example of where that can be promoted. And let's start with, there's two things I want to mention to be brief. Moving from an adversarial system to a system of inquiry. And that even means changing the way the room is set up. A round table, for example, as opposed to the way that it's set up where it promotes conflict, right? In the family of all places, right? And I also want to say that when I speak with young lawyers today, or these days, I encourage them to think differently. Don't just think of a law firm as a place where you give only legal advice. But what if you set up your firm? Let's say you're doing family law. Set up your firm where in your firm, you have financial advisors. You have your social worker. You have your psychology people who are going to be speaking about the well-being of the child and also counseling the parties to the family conflict, actually in the firm itself. So breaking away from silos and coming together, that is a way of presenting a service, again, from a 360-degree perspective. So I'm saying that these things are really within our power. That's not technology. These things are with our power to do actually on the ground. And the more that a firm like that, let's say if that was done, then the courts see that, yes, this can be done, and why aren't we doing it as well? And so I think that, we don't always have to have difficulty. There can be small adjustments that can actually help in terms of re-engineering.
So Alice has mentioned data. We're beginning to hear quite a bit about what solutions really deliver what the smart buys are. And there's also the question of finance and how to pay for them. And I've been slightly remiss about the polling questions. We have one more polling question for you that's going to ask you to choose which of those three you think really is the biggest obstacle that we face at the moment. Is it data about problems? Is it not really having enough innovative, cost-effective, scalable solutions? Or is it a money problem that we're primarily facing? We know what to do. We understand the problem. We know what to do. We just don't have the money to pay for it. I mean, it's obviously some of each, but you're invited to pick one of those. I'm going to go to Kelechi now, who is also one of the young justice leaders and is I think my newest colleague at the UN Foundation, is our next generation fellow for justice and our kind of official connection to the young justice leaders. And we probably have time for maybe one more person to come in. If anybody else has a question, please put your hand up or come into chat. But Kelechi, if you're, I can see down on the screen there. If you're able to come in now, please ask your question or make your comment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly.
All right. Hi, David. Thank you. So interestingly, my question is on finance and justice, right? So hi, Alison. We've noticed a decline in funding justice globally, and probably just ask the questions of the poll, but mine will be, in the case of funding, how can we as young leaders help mobilize resources, for financing people-centered justice? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Kelechi. I would like to see us look at the justice system the way that, in a way like the public health system. When something happens, like the pandemic, resources are moved just like that to make it happen. And so I think that if we position the crisis that we are facing, look at instability around the world, look at what the Secretary General is saying about lack of trust around the world, and others who were speaking about this, that's a crisis, right? The fact that 1.5 billion people feel that their justice needs are not met. So what we do is mobilize resources to deal with this in the same way that in the public health system, resources would be mobilized. And I think that data, it's not just a matter of just throwing information at. The public health people are very meticulous about producing data to justify their requests. I think we can learn tremendously from the public health system. And again, I don't back off on my point about the vote. And I think that the use of social media that young people are very adept at and are able to mobilize rebellions. I'm not promoting instability, but I'm saying that you can get across your point very, very, very effectively in that way as well. But I would use data to promote it and promote people's experiences, speak about the importance of impacting people, because that's what politicians usually say they care about.
And I think this relevance to the crisis and emergencies that we are facing is an incredibly important point. We know that people around the world are struggling to afford food. We know that energy prices are spiking in an unprecedented fashion. We suspect that interest rates are going to soar in societies around the world, and that is going to have a range of impacts on everything from homeowners to businesses to the whole financial system. I think, and then the insecurity and instability that could lead to. And I think the Pathfinders and others did a good case of trying to articulate what the role of justice actors was on the front line of the COVID pandemic. And we really need to be ready to make the same case about what is going to happen to societies over the next year or so. The next year or so, which is going to be very turbulent. And I just mentioned as an aside that the UK has managed to lose a prime minister during the course of this conversation that that we're having. But Gulsen, Cynthia, do you have any thoughts on the financing question? You're both also young justice leaders. How do you think you can work with Kelechi and with the other young justice leaders and with partners across the people-centered justice movement to make that case that money is needed to scale this stuff up and it will have positive impacts across all of the sustainable development goals? Maybe to you first on this, Cynthia.
Thank you. I think the issue of the legal financing, it comes with prioritizing the needs of justice. And to us as the young justice leader, it all goes back to our role as activists in the society, and as well as how much we table this particular need to the different governments and as well as the private sector in order for them to be involved and ensure that there is enough funding in this for the legal fund. And I'll give an example of many countries have the primary living education, the universal education, which is free of charge. They have the primary health care, which is as well free of charge. You can move into a hospital and you get basic health services. You can go to a school and get basic education services, but the same is not there for the legal, for example, legal aid, that there are many countries that have free legal aid. So this as well goes back to the priorities and our role as activists to put it to the government that this is as well something that needs to be prioritized. And as well, we need the legal aid in the different countries provided by the government and as well as other stakeholders to see that there is need for basic legal services to be provided to the different people in the different countries, especially those ones at the grassroots who cannot be in position to afford a private lawyer and pay for their services. But if these legal aid services are provided by the private, by the government, first of all, before it goes to the private sector, then well and good. And it as well goes back to the role of the activist.
Okay, and Gulsen, how do you see the young justice leaders influencing this debate?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with financing is sadly we are stuck in things where we can see the impact very short term. So when the government is investing in something, they really want a quick return, and it's what the return, how it's defined, as you said, Alison. I think it's very rigid at the moment, and I really think we can bring this new perspective on what a return is, what an impact is, how we can really understand something that we do will have an impact in 10, 20, 50 years, especially on topics like climate justice, or how we can take actions on that we cannot always think, or we cannot always be in this emergency mode where we always need to reply the most dire needs, but really kind of going into being in a place where we can clearly see, okay, this is an investment we're willing to make as a government, and we know the impact we'll see in 50 years. Maybe I won't be even alive to be elected. So I really do think we need to shift some gears in our heads, how we think about impact, and then in return how we can really change the conversation and convince governments and policymakers to really allocate funds and resources where it's needed, where we truly believe that will be meaningful in our lifetime.
And I think there's an asymmetry there, isn't there? Because I mean, Alison talked about some of the damages, which I think can happen very, very quickly. You know, we should remember that the Arab Spring was triggered by an injustice and by a justice actor, and that had, you know, radical and rapid consequences, not just for that society, but for a whole string of societies across the region and even beyond. So that happened almost in a flash instantly. Whereas I think you're right, some of the positive impacts are about building institutions patiently and over years to deliver results over generations. And this is also one of the arguments for focusing on countries with large numbers of young people, the young countries, because building justice institutions, justice systems there will deliver massive dividends across the 21st century if we get it right. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to look at the results of the polls. So we have 3 questions, and I think we're going to hear the results from those now. So first question, I'm just seeing this for the first time. So you think the impact of justice systems is mixed. It's both eroding and strengthening the social contract, and we have to get that message out to get it across. The second question, I'm afraid we are, somewhat pessimistic. 40% of us think that justice systems are not people-centered and it's not improving. 40% think it is improving. 20% think that we already have people-centered justice systems. So maybe this is indicating that we are at a kind of pivotal point. And then, interesting on the biggest obstacle, relatively few people think the big problem is not knowing the scale of the problem. I mean, of course, it's always important to know more about problems, and it's essential for designing systems that work, but that may not be the biggest problem. A lot of people think money is the obstacle, and as Kelechi indicated, it's possibly becoming a growing obstacle as money goes out of justice systems rather than flows into it. But a plurality think, 47% think that it's the solutions that are the problem, and that we need to do more to articulate to policymakers, stakeholders of all kinds, what the kind of scalable, innovative, cost-effective solutions would be. With that, I think we're coming to the end of an incredibly rich discussion. I would go back to one of the messages I give at the beginning. This is a time of opportunity. I think the people-centered justice community has made important strides, but we're still far from that mainstreaming breakthrough moment that we need. But we have opportunities at the SDG Summit, at the Summit of the Future, in many other forums. We have the chance to bring together justice ministers, to talk to finance ministers, to start to talk to heads of state, to rally to mobilize the public and popular demand, to get the voices of young people heard, to demonstrate the innovation that is possible. And that's going to continue to need the work of Pathfinders, Knowledge Platform, and others that are platforms for bringing together multiple actors into a fleet. One of my favorite metaphors, to get the boats into a fleet and sailing in roughly the same direction. So let's recommit to working together for this cause, and let's follow the example of the justice leaders. We've heard from Alison today, who's a fantastic member of what is a fantastic group, and let's explore how we can work with the young justice leaders. And we've had 2 of them on the panel and heard from Kelechi from the floor today, a new group that I think is going to make some waves and help shake up things. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much for the Knowledge Platform for hosting us and for the excellent work behind the scenes, and particularly thanks to Pathfinders for bringing together this session. Have a great day. I'm going to go and catch up on the political crisis in the UK. Alison, sorry.
Thank you for your excellent moderating. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.